The date, August 6, 1945. A U.S. bomber dropped an atomic bomb over the Japanese city of Hiroshima. The attack was the first time a nuclear weapon was used during a war. An estimated 140,000 people were killed. 3 days later, it dropped a second nuclear weapon. On Nagasaki, at least 74,000 people died. 2 weeks after the attacks, Japan surrendered, ending the Second World War. In the years that followed, many of the survivors of the nuclear attack faced leukemia, cancer, or other terrible side effects from the radiation. However, this was not the world's first nuclear explosion. The first atomic bomb was detonated on July 16, 1945 in New Mexico. It was part of the U.S. government program called the Manhattan Project. It is considered as the beginning of the nuclear arms race. Not long after World War II ended in 1945, new hostilities emerged between the United States and the Soviet Union and their respective allies. For more than 40 years, the two superpowers threatened each other with nuclear weapons. Other countries too started developing nuclear weapons, though not on the same scale. Today, 9 countries possess nuclear weapons. Here they are on the world map: the United States, Russia, China, the United Kingdom, France, India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea. Since their peak in the mid-1980s, global arsenals have shrunk by over 3/4. Now in total, the global nuclear stockpile is close to 13,000 weapons. The United States and Russia account for 90% of them. But the pace of reductions is slowing down. In fact, according to a leading arms watchdog, we may see the figures increase.
Because the pace of dismantlement is slowing and there is a stockpile increase that's going on, soon we're going to get to the point where, for the first time since the end of the Cold War, the global number of nuclear weapons in the world could start increasing for the first time. And that is, really kind of dangerous territory.
30 years after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the world is staring at one of the biggest security crises in Europe since World War II. Russia launched an all-out invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February. Putin justified the attack as, quote, a special military operation, as an act of self-defense, and to prevent genocide. But even after 4 months of war, Moscow has not been able to capture Kyiv. Instead, it shifted its focus to Ukraine's east, which broadly refers to Donetsk and Luhansk, where Russian-backed separatists held significant territory before the invasion. Russian forces now control the whole region of Luhansk. The war has led to a resurgence of fears about the use of nukes. In April, the Russian Ministry of Defense tested a new long-range nuclear missile. The Sarmat, dubbed Satan II by Western analysts, was an unambiguous threat to Russia's enemies, particularly the United States. Putin has called it, quote, invincible. It is among Russia's next-generation missiles that also includes the Kinzhal, and avant-garde hypersonic missiles. In March, 3 weeks into the attack, Russia said it fired hypersonic missiles from its Kinzhal system to destroy an underground weapons storage site in the west of Ukraine. The claimed strike marked the first use of the nuclear-capable advanced weapons system in the Ukraine war. It is this atmosphere that has accelerated the arms race around the world.
It's a really interesting situation that we're seeing and really concerning, right? We're seeing that the kind of this nuclear signaling that that President Putin has been using over the past few weeks and months has really brought this issue of nuclear use back into the public consciousness. And it's causing, I think, a lot of other nuclear armed states to, think about their own nuclear strategies, potentially adjusting the way that they talk about nuclear weapons. I think at the very least, we're going to see that it's going to be very difficult to make progress on disarmament over the coming years because of this war and because of how Putin is talking about his nuclear weapons.
The war is grinding on. Western heavy weapons are helping Ukraine halt Russia. In fact, Ukraine has been getting limited military aid from the United States since 2014, after the annexation of Crimea. Since the February invasion, the U.S. has provided $5.6 billion of military aid, including the latest $1 billion package that was announced by the Biden administration in June. On May 20th, Britain said that it has committed $566 million so far to support the Ukrainian military, while Canada has supplied Ukraine with $208 million worth of military aid since February. Let's look at the weapons that are pouring into Ukraine from the West. The four main categories of weapons are basic guns and ammunition, missiles, attack drones, and artillery. One of the most talked about weapons is this, the Javelin missile. The United States has supplied Ukraine with thousands of javelins, the anti-tank missiles that have become an iconic weapon of the war. The javelin automatically guides itself to the target after launch. Ukraine claims that Russia has lost 335 tanks and just over 1,100 armored combat vehicles in the fighting. Despite promises of arms transfers, Kyiv says it is still outgunned by Russian forces.
At the very top, at least, they are not wringing their hands, panicking about Western support for Ukraine. They very much think it can be outlasted, and they very much think that the current violent approach that they're going for is working. So what does that tell us about the possibility for an advance beyond Donbass? All cards are potentially on the table if the Russians feel they can resource it. And the big unknown, the thing we just do not know about is the state of the Ukrainian forces.
Another challenge for Ukraine, it has almost completely run out of ammunition for the Soviet-era weapons systems that were the mainstay of its arsenal. President Volodymyr Zelensky is pleading for more heavy weapons to defend itself.
Influx of weapons into Ukraine is beginning to evolve in take on a new dimension. The first dimension was Soviet legacy weaponry that could be easily adaptable to Ukrainian forces, mechanics, engineers, everybody on the air crews, everybody on the ground. What can be supplied that requires the least logistical hurdles and training of Ukrainian forces. So that well of supply is beginning to slowly dry up from the NATO side of the equation. The former Warsaw Pact countries are basically emptying their inventories, and they will seek to backfill through modern weapons platforms, meaning Western standardized, whether they're German sourced, French sourced, American sourced, etc. For the Ukrainians, the next step is training on more modern Western platforms that, like the HIMARS launchers that the U.S. is supplying to Ukraine.
As the old adage goes, war is always good for business. And the Ukraine war is a boon for American-made weapons.
Right now, the U.S. defense industry is at probably maximum pace. You can hear it from CEOs making statements in the media. And for every shipment of weaponry that goes to Ukraine from a NATO country, they will need to resupply on their own end to keep their minimum capabilities up to date. Therefore, from the contractor point of view, this has been a boon. But yes, the truth of the matter is the people bearing the brunt of this are the Ukrainian people, and they're certainly not the winners in this. I don't think anyone can deny that. But the net equation, yes, the contractors are certainly they're reaping the dividend of this.
American defense firms are the indisputable leaders of the world's arms sales industry. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and Boeing are the three largest defense companies in the world, and all of them are American. Russia is the world's second largest arms exporter behind the United States. Apart from the US, countries who have supplied Ukraine with weapons and military equipment include the UK, Canada, Australia, Belgium, Croatia, Czech Republic, Denmark, Estonia, Finland, France, Germany, Greece, Italy, Latvia, Lithuania, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, North Macedonia, Norway, Poland, Portugal, Romania, Slovakia, Slovenia, Spain, Sweden, and Turkey. The conflict has also given another excuse for countries that are helping Ukraine to increase their defense budgets. On the 30th of June, Britain announced that it will boost its defense spending to 2.5% of its gross domestic product by the end of this decade, committing to bolster the country's military budget after Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
We need to invest for the long term in vital capabilities like future combat air, while simultaneously adapting to a more dangerous and more competitive world. And the logical conclusion of the investments on which we propose to embark, of these decisions, is that we will reach 2.5% of GDP on defense by the end of the decade.
Hundreds of Ukrainian troops have completed military training in Britain, including on multiple launch rocket systems, or MLRS, which the UK is supplying to help counter Russian artillery tactics. Ukrainian troops were also trained for loading and firing 105mm light guns during exercises in Salisbury, England.
We've had them for nearly 3 weeks now. They arrived at very short notice. A mixture of the trained audience consisted of logisticians, maintainers, operators and command post officers. And we've put them through a modulated programme to not only train them on this system, but how to plan and prepare its deployment too.
In April, Boris Johnson had paid a surprise visit to Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv. The British Prime Minister had vowed to send 120 armored vehicles and new anti-ship missile systems. This came a day after he promised an additional $130 million of high-grade military equipment to Ukraine. This is a Bayraktar armed drone. It is manufactured by Baykar Defense, the Turkish drone magnate. The deadly combat drone has been acquired by Ukraine and has been deployed during the Russian invasion. The high-performance and relatively inexpensive aircraft has proved decisive in the conflicts in Nagorno-Karabakh and Libya in the past. The proliferation of drones in the Ukraine war is also fueling a fresh arms race. Manufacturers of unmanned aerial systems, communications engineers developing radio wave scramblers, and GPS jammers are all trying to outdo one another. Recently, exhibitors at the Paris Eurocity Military Expo displayed flying machines that they claim can change the course of the war. They say they are still trying to tackle some unique challenges.
It's a race between the anti-drone systems and the drone manufacturers overall. Is how are we able to operate into very highly challenged environment, being communication or GNSS environment, challenge environment, and at the opposite is how to create that environment without being stuck. Because we've seen in Ukraine about the challenges is if you turn jammers at the maximum level, obviously you don't have communication either for other things. So you need to be able to balance a bit between the two. So challenging.
The Russia-Ukraine war has entered into its 5th month. Thousands of troops have died. More than 4,000 civilians have been killed. Unabated, it might continue for months, if not years. Warning against foreign intervention, President Putin has made more than one reference to Russia's nuclear weapons. The war has brought questions of nuclear deterrence back to the fore. When the Soviet Union collapsed, Ukraine was left with the 3rd largest stockpile of nuclear weapons. Ukraine turned over thousands of atomic weapons in exchange for security guarantees from the United States, Russia, and other countries. Russia's nuclear arsenal is one big reason why it has not faced an international military response. Will the war prompt more countries to seek nuclear weapons now?
It becomes a deterrent, and the question is, would a stronger neighbor or potential foe invade country X if they have a nuclear weapons capability. So I imagine that you are going to see more interest in countries in the Middle East, countries along the Russian periphery, seeking to develop or acquire a nuclear capability. It's no secret that Iran has pushed to create a nuclear capability, and the North Koreans are constantly testing their nuclear missile capability. So I do think it becomes an increased threat out of the fallout from this Russian invasion into Ukraine.
The decision lies in the hands of just a few people. And so, things can change really quickly. Like we're not able to predict how they're feeling or thinking. And so nuclear escalation remains pretty high right now. I think more than ever in the post-Cold War era, we need countries to be sitting down at the negotiating table and considering what the next, 10, 20, 30 years of multilateral arms control should look like.